Okay, this is an overview of the new RetroPie 2.4 beta. Came out, I think, 6th of January 2015, so it's pretty recent, and it's got a few improvements, changes, tweaks over the 2.3 that everyone's been using for about the last 6 months. I've just had a quick look through, and there's quite a lot of useful changes, some really good helpful configuration assistance in the setup of this, and I'll try to run through what I've seen. I'm sure there's bits that I might have missed, so if there is anything, please put it in the comments for everyone to see. You can see on the screen now, I've just booted this clean 2.4 image up, and it's asking me to type in the gamepad button, so I'll just hold button on my gamepad, and this is exactly the same emulation station as been there before, so this isn't new or different or anything, but I'll just configure this now. Up, down, left, right on my gamepad, A, B, start select, and page up, page down, and A to OK. And then we get straight into emulation station. You can see already on the left there a new default showing ScumVM, so a bit better integration of ScumVM. If you select that, it gets into a nice sort of GUI interface where your joypad can control the mouse, and you can select ScumVM files to boot into pretty easily. You've got ports that was there before, although now it's got Quake added. I don't think Quake was there before. I gave it a quick go, works really well, got killed really quickly, same as usual. Got Macintosh and IBM, Apple II. These are the same defaults that are loaded in Emulation Station as before. As far as I can see, I can't see any difference with Emulation Station. It's still version 2. I don't think there's any changes there necessarily, other than the config files for it have been changed slightly, obviously, to get ScumVM showing for 1. Again, as usual, you put your ROMs in the ROM directories, and they will then show up on this screen. There's plenty of other videos to show how to go about that. When you do download the image for emulation for RetroPie 2.4, it is in a .gz compressed format. So something like on Windows anyway, 7-zip will open that. So when you download it to your desktop and it says .gz, and maybe you can't open that as normal, use the program, the free program 7-zip. It will open it up. You'll see a .img file in there. Extract it to your desktop or wherever, and then write it as normal. There's a separate video on how to write images, so I won't go over it again here. It's just the same process as normal. Write it to the SD card, put it in the Pi, and it'll boot, as you saw here, straight into Emulation Station by default. There's lots of general improvements on this, and there is a changelog on the PetRock webpage. I'll put the address in the description. It's got some highlights there, but I'll try to show you on screen exactly what those changes are with relation to the emulators. And particularly there is a new Atari Lynx emulator, so you can get all those classic handheld games going, like Clax. Runs fine, I've given it a go, seems to work pretty well, so that Atari Lynx one's available now. And you might have noticed as well, when this booted, there's no gap now between seeing the RetroPie splash screen and then it pretty much goes straight to the Emulation Station splash screen. I'm sure before in 2.3, after the RetroPie one, it went black on the, so you could see the terminal screen behind it with a load of text on. So that was it's an improvement, just to sort of flip between the nice images there quite easily and quickly. I think on that ScumVM that you can see here, when you do go into it, I won't go into it now because I think when you hit launch GUI, the video capture goes a bit funny. But I think it picks up the control to use the mouse with the Emulation Station input that I just configured. I think that's the case, but it worked for me off the bat anyway, so I guess that's where it's picking it up from. And then you just pick up the ScumVM files that you've put on your Pi. There's a lot more in the run command script now. The run command script is what RetroPie runs prior to kicking into the game. So it's used previously in 2.3. It's pretty much about managing the graphical output and how the screen's displayed, and it still is now, but there's a lot more options. There's some really good stuff there, and I'll show you actually here. We can do it on, say, a ports. Now this is the same as in going into any emulator. If I was in Genesis here, or SNES, or Master System, whatever, I choose my ROM, and when it boots, you get a brief prompt to press either X or M. I don't know why it's X or M and not just X or M, but both buttons do the same thing and bring you to a interface to choose the video output, which is really useful rather than having to do that in a text editor and edit the ES systems.cfg, which we'll look at in a minute, but you can do it effectively through a GUI here. So what I'm going to do is select a ROM or a game and press M before it boots, and it'll just fire into that screen. So I'll do that now, loading that game. Now you see at the top it says X or M. You might have to pause the video to catch that, but it should have shown. And then I get this option, and I can choose the video mode for this emulator. Usually it's a bit more sensible because we'd be going into Megadrive section and it'd be for the Megadrive emulator, but I'm in ports, so it's slightly different. But you'll get these three options, so you can say, right, every time any Megadrive game loads, I want a particular video mode. Or it looks like here, option 2, I can choose a video mode for a specific ROM, so you could have a different video setup for every single game. I haven't tried all that yet, but on the face of it, it looks like it works, and then that removes the default video mode for the ROM. And it knows the ROM, I guess, because I've already just selected the game I wanted to play a second ago, so it will relate to whatever I fired at there. Now if I do the general emulator, so if this was SNES for example, it would edit all the SNES video modes. I'll press enter and it'll bring up on the screen all of the video modes I can have for that. At the moment I've got 1280 by 720 at 60 Hz, 16:9 selected, so that's effectively 720p TV. I know it says 16:9, but when I play ROMs they look quite 4:3 ratio to me, so that it seems to work fine anyway. Or you could force 4:3 and choose this option. But you can see all the different options there. You can give them a try and see what's best on your screen. I mean, you could even go full HD there at 1920 by 1080 and see how that looks. But obviously the games aren't going to look great when they're blown up to that sort of size, unless perhaps you use shaders or go for a few other options. But this way I can simply select, right, well, I'll go for this video mode, and it will remember. Okay, just lost the video for a second there because the video capture gets confused when it flips into a different video mode. We'll do that again. Go to say Doom 1 and press A. I'll hit X at this point where it prompts me at the top. Get back to that screen. You can see it's talking about the particular emulator. Again, this isn't the best example because in ports, they've all got effectively their own emulator. But normally you go into SNES and then choose it for that. So if I choose for video modes for Doom there, go there and I can select whichever one I want. I'm not going to, because as soon as I do that, the game will load in that mode and it'll remember it. And as I said, you don't have to press X or M to boot into this part of the menu. It's just if you want to change the defaults. But it's even got the SDTV ones down the bottom there, so you can, if you've got this, I guess, on a sort of composite out onto a CRT TV, you can flip it into that right video mode there. Which is a great improvement on the previous 2.3, where you had to edit the ES systems CFG, and then I don't think it had this many modes pre-configured within it, but this is making it a lot easier and user-friendly straight away. Okay, so I'm going to press escape, cancel, and see where that takes me. I don't know if I've lost the video there. It looks like it's remembered it and it hasn't changed out of the mode, so you can see that game firing up. I'm going to try and quit out of that anyway. F4, no, escape. Okay, quit game. Got there in the end. Okay. RetroArch menu firing up for some reason. I think that's the default actually in the new RetroArch.cfg to show this, but I'll try and get rid of that now. Okay, quitting RetroArch. Hopefully the video's held together there. Back to emulation station. I'll show the RetroArch CFG updates in a second as well. But as you can see, there's already a big improvement to how you're going to run in those games, and when you've got all the ROMs listed, you can easily select whichever one you want as normal, and you've got all these video options to get it appearing exactly as you want, depending on how your TV is set up. This one happens to be a 720p LCD, and I think that's getting reflected on the certainly in Emulation Station I'm getting the full screen effect. When I go into a ROM, it appropriately sort of chops the sides so I get the full through look. Okay, so now let's look at the file system and have a look at some of the updates that have happened there. Also, with the ROMs, quite a big change now, and I think this is in the changelog, it mentions that you can put your ROMs there as zip files. Certainly the ones I tried for the Megadrive work fine, and I think it'll work for quite a few of the other emulators as well. With the run through RetroArch, it just automatically reads them, so it's a lot easier to manage them if you've already got them in zips rather than having to take them all out of zips, upload them. So that's a big bonus as well, natively playing the zip files. Okay, let's take a look at the file system now. Okay, if you connect to your Pi, you could do it either direct on the TV or through PuTTY, which is what I'm doing, so do it remotely when it's got a connection there. I'm going to log in as Pi, and there's plenty of other videos that including some of mine that show how to use PuTTY to connect and find your IP, so I won't go over that again. I'll just run through what's changed. The purpose of this video really is trying to get what the differences in RetroPie 2.4 beta is. So yeah, bear in mind as well, it is beta, so no doubt there's going to be revisions of this before the final version, so tweaks maybe that you spot will be sort of, I'm sure, seen by the developers and maybe fed back. Okay, so we've got login as Pi and password is Raspberry, and there we go, it boots into it. And one difference that you can see already on the little boot up screen here is it shows you the temperature. Pretty sure it didn't say that in 2.3, so I can see mine's currently 63 degrees, which is a lot hotter than it used to be. I've been testing and using it a bit earlier this evening, but I'm surprised it's quite that high at the moment. I haven't set any particular overclock. This is pretty stock, it's whatever RetroPie sets everything up as. But my Pi also is in a case. Although it's ventilated, it is cased and it hasn't got a heatsink or anything like that. So I guess it's warm. And I think, you know, they're fine probably up to, is it high 70s? Something like that. So I'm not too worried about that temperature, but it's a useful, you know, point to look at when you do boot up. And as always, it's got the IP address there, so you can see if you want to connect to it remotely. You'll see this on the telly and you can always remote to it. That way, so it's quite, I always tend to do it remotely. It's easier using the main computer keyboard and that sort of thing. You can also see I haven't done anything with the Raspberry config file, which resizes your card and other tasks as well, because at the top there the size of the disk is the same size as the image that we wrote, which is 1.8 gig. If I resized my card I'd get 32 gig, but this is just for the purpose really, it's a stock 2.4 beta install, so you see what happens there. Okay, now one thing, when you manage and edit the RetroPie, quite often you do want to edit some text files, and it's quite easy and straightforward to do it in this terminal interface, and you'll see on the other videos plenty of times how I do it. But one thing I've noticed here, now I don't know if this is expected or I'm doing something slightly wrong, but if I go and edit a text file, so let's see what directory I'm in here. There's a file there, a log file. So I'll edit that, and I want to do it as administrator to make sure I've got full rights. So if I do anything, it's not just editing text files, but if I do anything as sudo, none is the text editor, and if I edit that file, you can see when I press enter, very briefly, a line underneath says unable to, and I'll quit out of this, Control X, it says unable to resolve host RetroPie. Now with 2.4 beta, it does default the host name of the SD card really, or the Raspberry Pi, to RetroPie, and you'll see that on various bits of software that detect host names on hardware devices. You'll see it's called RetroPie, which identifies it really well, but you do get this error. So to resolve the error, you can, what I've done, again, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but it works for me. If I change directory to the etc directory and then edit, and I'll get the error again, but it still works fine, you just get the error and I want to get rid of the error. Edit the host file, you'll see here that this last line here says 1.7.0.1.1 is Raspberry Pi. Now in the host file that I'll look at in a minute, it's set this to RetroPie, so if I match it to set this to RetroPie, I don't get the error anymore. Control X, save modified buffer, yes. Find him to write to host, that's correct. I just press enter. It drops out of it. Now, if I edit the, I think it's the host file, just check ls h. So I just edited the hosts file, and I'm going to look at the host name file. So if I output, I think you can output with cat host name. Yeah, see that file contains the line RetroPie. So all I've done is edit the hosts file to have, instead of Raspberry Pi where you saw it a minute ago, changed it to RetroPie, and I don't get the error anymore. So if I do sudo nano back in that host file, it just goes in fine. So, it works for me. I don't know if that's the right thing, but I'm running with it. Okay, now one really quite big change really is if we go back to the home directory, which you can do with CD and then the tilde sign, which is usually next to the @ key. I suppose it depends on what sort of keyboard, but that's where it is on mine. Back in that directory, I'm going to go in the RetroPie directory, which is where the ROMs file is, folder is. Now in ROMs, if I list that, you can see there's quite a lot more ROM folders than there are on 2.3, but a lot of these are effectively types of duplicates, but they're duplicates in terms of they're the locations you can put ROMs so that different emulators will run it. So for example, a good one I think is Megadrive. You can see here we've got Megadrive, which if I put ROMs in there, it would run, and we'll see this in a minute when we look at the ES systems CFG file. ROMs in Megadrive would run with the default RetroArch process that runs through, I think it's Megadrive, and that's what 2.3 did. But they've also added a new one, Megadrive-dgen. Now if I put the ROMs in there instead, the emulator dgen will run them. So that would mean, for a start, obviously it's a completely different emulator, but it would mean that's not going to process retroarch.cfg files. So for example, I'm not sure how you get things like shaders to work with that, because I only know how to do that through RetroArch. I don't know if you can get shaders running through dgen. Maybe you can, I'm not sure. But that's the principle here. You can see Game Gear, it's got whatever the default Game Gear one is, probably through RetroArch, but also specifically one called MOSE, Osmos. And you've got two for the Atari 2600 over here. So it's basically set up a load more ROM folders so that you can try different emulators with your ROMs, and to try and get the best results really, a bit of trial and error and see what suits. You can put the same ROMs in both directories as well and try exactly the same game with both different emulators. So it does give you more choice. And again, these emulators will only appear in Emulation Station if there are ROMs in there. So although there are a load of folders here, they're only going to show in the graphical interface if you put ROMs in there. But it's good to see that you've got so many more options out of the box really. You don't have to worry about configuring a separate file to try and change emulators. Also, you'll see in the changelog that I think all of the emulators have pretty much been updated to the latest version with this RetroPie package, so if there are any improvements in those emulators, we should get the benefit of them here. What else on this one? We've got RetroArch updates. So noticed if we go to CD and APT, get the RetroPie, the main sort of RetroPie configuration files and emulators and everything else is in here. And if we go to configs and all as normal, you can see in here there's a retroarch.cfg file. Now if I edit that, cd nano retroarch.cfg, it's pretty much as 2.3, but there are a few extra options in this file now. The easiest way to see it is to compare it to a 2.3 file. Now I've done that on, I think it's diffchecker.com. I'll put a link in the description. You can see the differences between 2.3 and 2.4 beta. In the link, it does show my version of 2.3, which has got minor tweaks, but not very much at all. It's pretty vanilla. And you can see wherever there is a change there, that's probably a main change between 2.3 and 2.4. Sometimes it's just a phrase change from using the word player in 2.3 to using the word user in 2.4 beta. So it's not a big difference, but there are other areas here that that aren't in 2.3. like I think there's something about playlists. I haven't really looked into that, but that seems to get mentioned, and there's a few other bits and bobs in there, so you can see the differences in the RetroArch config that's used. But if you were using 2.3, you could update your config file, because I think the binary of well, if you update your binary of RetroArch, then it would use that anyway. But it's simpler just to use the latest build, so I think 2.4 beta is pretty good to go as it is, and you get all the benefits of the new configuration that I've talked about. Other things are with these emulators. I'll show you where they get configured in the emulation station. So that's in cd/etc, and then you go in the emulation station folder, cd emulation station, and list here. Then I've got es_systems, and that's the file where they're all configured. So if I edit that file, essystems.cfg, I'll do the Megadrive as an example. If I press Ctrl and W, then down the bottom you get search. I'm going to type Megadrive, and you can see here on the cursor, this is Megadrive-dgen, and the folder for that is RetroPie. Well, the tilde just means the home directory, so home/pi, and then RetroPie roms Megadrive-dgen, and you can see in the accepted extensions it's happy with zip there anyway. And this is just saying what emulation station would do when you run any ROMs in that folder. It runs the run command, which we saw earlier has been enhanced to press to let you configure the video mode pressing X or M, and you can choose. By default it's going to put you in video mode 1 if you don't press anything. And then here it's saying that in apt RetroPie emulators, in the dgen bin it runs dgen, so that's the emulator it runs with these flags. F I think forces full screen mode if it's possible. -R just means pass this configuration file. So the configuration file for the Megadrive emulator dgen is in apt RetroPie configs or dgen rc. So you can edit that and you can make a few tweaks, because obviously this isn't going to take note of any RetroArch configuration files. So again, in here you'll see multiple references to the same system. There's Megadrive dgen. If I Ctrl W again, look for Megadrive, press enter, because that's the same search. That just gone down to the platform line, and that's the theme line. But the next one there, Sega Megadrive. Here again, the valid extension includes zip, but this one defaults to video mode 4, and also it runs emulators RetroArch and processes the Megadrive library here. So it's a different emulator, and it passes the config file of a RetroArch one. So this one is running through RetroArch as 2.3 did. So you've got all of the systems there that effectively map to all those ROMs directories we saw earlier. So it's a lot more comprehensive. It's the same configuration as 2.3 in that you've still got a full name, you've still got a name, you've still got a path, extension, command, and platform. But it is there's more of them, so you've got more choice. And also in 2.3 there is some commented out commands to effectively use different emulators, but this is tidier to give you useful emulators all listed that will only kick in when you put ROMs in their directory anyway, or at least will only show in emulation station when they've got ROMs in their directory. So that's pretty useful. Okay, let's have a look. Other things that we can look at, if I exit out of this, a common script that you're going to run or should be running when you run RetroPie is the RetroPie setup script. That's quite a key part of the whole setup. So to find that, if you go to change directory, back to the home directory, the tilde there, I know it's in the RetroPie setup directory, so RetroPie -setup. Again, it's important to make sure the case is right, otherwise it won't change into the directory or edit the file, whatever you're trying to do. I'll list that directory and I can see the setup script there. I'll run that as administrator sudo // and it's retropie _setup.sh. We should get the sort of GUI box. I'm going to think about it. Okay, this is briefly moaning because I haven't got much disk space left. That's because I haven't resized my card yet, because I haven't done anything with this at all, but I'll just carry on for the purpose of this anyway. Yes, okay, now this is the same as if you'd run the RetroPie script on 2.3 and said update to the latest script. So it's very familiar to most people anyway. But the key things are always in the setup area there. Let's have a look and setup. And one thing I think that's new already is configure emulators to use DiskManX SDL. Now this is a graphical if I go in there, it enables it for different systems, and I think it's a hardware accelerator effectively for those emulators. I haven't tried it out, and you can see they're all for the emulator themselves, not running through RetroArch. So I think it just improves the speed maybe of the emulation, but again it's a trial and error thing, and you can see it's easy to enable and disable through this interface. So you can give that a go and see if it improves the view. I think I read it will maximize the screen whilst keeping the same ratio. Either way, it sounds like a good thing. You should try it, and ideally put in the comments if it works well, and I'll give it a go. So that's one new feature in the setup script that wasn't in 2.3. Like I say though, in 2.3 I imagine if you say update setup script, you'll probably get that option kicking in, but then you'd also have to make sure that the build's the same. You'd probably have to rebuild the binaries or maybe the source. Again, it's just easier using this image 2.4 beta because it's all there for you. A lot of these are similar and were there on 2.3. I've got a separate video on how change hotkeys work, so we don't really need to go into that. But this one here is really useful. Now by default, I think 2.4 beta has stripped out a lot of the default Raspbian, which the Raspbian is the operating system that the Raspberry Pi is running on, or RetroPie, and everything else is running on in this instance. But it'll have programs in Raspbian that you just don't need when you're using RetroPie, and if you strip those out, it's more streamlined. It won't have to worry about using that as disk space. It's just got a lot of advantages to take them out. I probably don't need to remove them because this is 2.4 beta. I think that's been done anyway, but you've got the option to sort of rerun that and strip it out if you don't want the extra files that you probably won't use. I've also got reset ownership permissions. Now a lot of forum posts often say that there's problems with permissions when they try to change ROMs or read ROMs or write back to the ROM directories, and that's often because they might use an FTP client and log in as root and make changes as root, but the user Pi needs to do things and then it can't because root's got ownership. So this option is going to be really useful in resolving a lot of problems. It should be something that you do if you get permission problems. I imagine it just runs down the ROMs directory and makes Pi the owner of the files. I haven't given that a go, but that's probably going to be really useful if you do get permission issues on your ROMs directory. And again, the rest are pretty much, they've been there before, nothing too new. Well, I can't remember if USB ROM service was there before, but I imagine that will let you put a USB stick into the Raspberry Pi with ROMs on, and that RetroPie would read those ROMs from that location rather than having to copy it to the SD card. So it's a bit more portable. You could bring your ROMs on a USB stick, plug it into the RetroPie, and it would just read those. So that could be quite useful as well. Okay, so that's I think the key differences in the RetroPie scripts. Some of those really useful and quite interesting. Cancel out of that. Don't need to do any more of those. Other things that I've noticed, and this, if we go to apt again, where the RetroPie folder is, which is obviously where most of the changes are going to be. If we go into the emulators folder, you'll see the emulators. There's RetroArch, and along with the specifics, we briefly looked at that DGen one earlier for the Megadrive. I think there's a couple of other ones. I don't remember Basilisk there before, but you can see these are the ones that are in the RetroPie 2.4 beta build. Now I'm going to go into RetroArch. One thing to notice, especially if you've got scripts that are looking at pass, RetroArch is now all in lowercase, and before it was capitalized, so it's just a file name change, which obviously isn't an issue, but if you've got scripts that you want to do import and use in this version, that's going to be something that's different. And in this directory, you've still got the shaders, so I haven't looked in there actually. It looks about the same amount of shaders. I don't think there's any new ones there. Yeah, they look about the same. But in this directory, if you go to configs, and you'll see in my other videos that in the configs directory is where the automatically generated scripts are for the controllers that you'll put in, the various USB joypads typically. So if I list that directory, I'll put LAH to show it more in a sort of human readable format. and you can see there's more here. I'm sure there's more in here than there are in 2.3. I think in 2.3 there's just 3 or 4 listed, and this did confuse me to start with. I started playing some games, and without me doing anything, RetroArch games just work with my joypad without me doing it. I didn't have to configure it or anything, but that's because my scripts, I think a chap on the forums called Gizmo uploaded my configuration script to this, and it is this one here, USB_2axis_8 button, and because it's there, RetroArch scripts by default looks for these auto scripts to see if it matches what you've plugged in, and because that is matches my controller, which is a iBuffalo. I've put a post up in the controller forum actually to show pictures of what that iBuffalo one is. It's really similar to a SNES controller, very similar with colours and everything on the buttons. Everything works, so I didn't have to do any configuration, but obviously if you've got a USB controller that isn't listed here, that isn't configured here, then you'll have to configure the controller as per normal, and there are plenty of videos you'll see. I've done a couple, how to configure your USB controller, which is really straightforward, especially if you're using the auto files, because they're right in new file here and away you go. So that's not different per se, but here you have got a lot more out the box. So a lot more people, they just plug the USB joypads in and they'll be away, I think, in RetroPie. Okay, what else have we got here? We've got, if we go back a directory, in RetroPie, and you've got the configs directory. This configs directory is the same as before. You've got the separate one for the systems. Again, this is predominantly for RetroArch, because if I go in Megadrive, for example, this is where RetroArch would look for. You can see retroarch.cfg there, any supplementary config files to write over the main one. The main one being in this all directory. You can see retroarch.cfg, which I think I opened earlier anyway to look through. So that works in the same way. But here is for the Megadrive, we've got the dgenrc. So there was, in the ROMs directory, we had 2 Megadrive folders. We had the RetroArch one, which uses PicoDrive, and we've got we had a separate one, Megadrive-dgen. So this is the config file that uses, and I can edit that in the same way as normal. cd nano dgenrc, and it's just got the configuration for that. It's different to RetroArch obviously, but it's got quite a few options there to tweak. And again, I was pretty surprised when I started playing dgen. I didn't touch any configuration, yet my joypad started to work without any problem. But I think it's just coincidence that here the joypad configuration just happens to be the same for my USB joypad, which was useful. I can only assume that's right because I don't know how else it would know how that USB joypad works. It must be quite a popular one, the iBuffalo. I haven't looked through all these options, but there are quite a few, and you can see, so you could tweak those. I haven't been through all of the separate emulators, that the new ones that have been added and configured, but they probably use their own config file in their own way as well. But yeah, you can see plenty of options down here. Okay, right, quit out of that. And that's pretty much it for first glance anyway. I think it's a great improvement over 2.3. Lots of more user-friendly options to improve the experience. Obviously, pretty much the end result, playing the game between 2.3 and 2.4 is going to be very, very similar. It's the same ROM you're playing, and you've got your Raspberry Pi overclocked at the same rate. It's just you could choose a different emulator now, which might give you a slightly different gaming experience, but I wouldn't have thought it would be that noticeable on them. So from that perspective, it's the same. But there's, in terms of configuration, there's so many more options now. It's much easier. It's, I think, a definite step forward. Really useful. It'd be great to see the next revision of 2.4 beta. Any questions, put them down in the comments, or if you find changes as well, put them down in the comments for other people to see. It'd be really useful to see what other enhancements 2.4 beta's got.